we manifest this world we think is so real in the same way that a computer manifests the world of the internet. People, you say to people, what is the internet? They would say, it's websites and it's graphics and it's moving pictures and it's images and it's text. Yes, it is. But only on the screen. Nowhere else is the internet like that. Everywhere else, it's radiation information fields and electronic coding and all that stuff. Only on the screen does the internet we perceive as the internet exist. The only place this reality we call five-sense physical reality, the physical world, exists, is in our heads. When we have decoded it in just the same basic way that a computer decodes Wi-Fi. The foundation of this reality, this construct we call the universe, this interactive reality we call the universe, is waveform information. And through the five senses, the waveform information becomes electrical information and then becomes holographic stroke digital information. As we construct a reality, just like a computer constructs that reality from Wi-Fi in our heads, the world we're convinced is outside of us, because that's how we experience it, is actually inside of us. Even words are waveform, the same process. As I'm speaking now, my vocal cords are creating waveform vibrational fields of information. Only when the hearer decodes that information from the waveform to the language that we perceive that I'm speaking now, only then do we hear the words. It's not words that pass between us. It's information fields that become words when they are decoded into language. So the waveform becomes the digital, becomes the holographic, illusory physical. And that's the reality we are experiencing. Now this, as I'll come to shortly, puts this whole extraterrestrial UFO arena into a completely different light. A light where those that have described their experiences, which from a five-sense perceptual level sound impossible and ridiculous, can be quite logically and easily explained. What are the five senses? They take waveform information, they turn it into electrical information, they communicate that to the brain, and the brain decodes that into digital and holographic information that we call the external world. These different parts of the brain specialize in decoding from different senses, and then the brain as a whole constructs this reality. This is a Western philosopher called Alan Watts, who had a lot of great things to say. I think he died in 1975. Without the brain, he said, the world is devoid of light, heat, weight, solidity, motion, space, time, or any other imaginable feature. All these phenomena are interactions or transactions of vibrations with a certain arrangement of neurons. Put another way, this isn't real. What is real? How do you define real? If you're talking about what you can feel, what you can smell, taste, and see, then real is simply electrical signals interpreted by your brain. And what interprets those signals? Perception. And this decoding of this information is done like this. This is from a mainstream science magazine. Every second, 11 million sensations crackle along these brain pathways. The brain is confronted with an alarming array of images, sounds, and smells, which it rigorously filters down until it is left with a manageable list of around 40 from 11 million. Thus, 40 sensations per second make up what we perceive as reality. The possibilities for manipulating that reality are infinite. losing time on an abduction, piece of cake. And I was seeing a video this week by a neuroscientist who was saying that the way the brain constructs reality in the way I'm describing is from prior expectations. What it perceives reality to be is how it will construct reality. Now that connection is so massively opening the door to perceptual manipulation. But I would go another step, and I would say, rather than prior expectations, to a very, very large extent, they are programmed expectations. Programmed expectations that come from a lifetime of programming that we call human life. This neuroscientist also said that the I, or me, is a controlled hallucination generated by the brain. Well, it might be generated by the brain or from the brain, but it's generated via the brain. Because what is the brain decoding to create this controlled hallucination? Information received. Control that, you control the hallucination. The reality that we experience is generated by information received by the brain and interpreted by perception. We keep coming back to the same word because this is the foundation of everything. So, one of these controlled hallucinations is that the world is outside of us when it's here all along. And if you can manipulate a computer to dictate what it takes from the Wi-Fi field and puts on the screen, so you can do the same with humanity if you know what you're talking about. This is Max Planck, another pioneer of quantum theory. I regard consciousness as fundamental. I regard matter as derivative from consciousness. Personally, I regard matter as an illusion caused by its particular frequency and the way that we decode it. But this is gives you an idea of how crazy it is. This is by a scientist called Robert Lanza in a book called Biocentrism. And he's describing what happens for us to see a candle and a flame, just a simple thing like that. The flame, he said, is emitting photons or tiny packets of electromagnetic energy, each pulsing electrically and magnetically. These invisible electromagnetic waves strike a human retina, and if and only if the waves happen to measure between 400 and 700 nanometers in length from crest to crest, then their energy is just right to deliver a stimulus to the 8 million cone-shaped cells in the retina. Each in turn send an electrical pulse to a neighbor neuron, and up the line this goes at 250 miles per hour until it reaches the optical lobe of the brain. This is the back of the brain that decodes visual reality, in the back of the head. There, a cascading complex of neurons fire from the incoming stimuli, and we subjectively perceive this experience as a yellow brightness occurring in a place we have been conditioned to call the external world. The reality that we think we're experiencing is nothing like what we're really experiencing. Does a falling tree make a noise? Only if you hear it. What? That's crazy. No, it's not. Because when a falling tree makes a noise, just as my voice becoming words has to have a decoder, receiver to do that, another person, so the tree falls, what it just does is disturb the energetic field and create a vibrational disturbance. If there's no one there, then it makes no noise. If there's someone there, that disturbance is decoded by the hearing senses into electrical form, sent to the brain, and the brain hears the sound of what we call a tree falling. Now, put all this together, and suddenly these apparently fantastic impossible descriptions of experiences by people who say they've interacted with extraterrestrial beings, entities, takes on a whole new level of simple explanation. Everything we call real, said Niels Bohr, another great pioneer of quantum physics. Everything we call real is made of things that cannot be regarded as real. This is an atom. We're told that atoms make up the physical world, and that's why it's physical. The atom has no solidity. You've got the nucleus, you've got the electrons going around it, and the space between them is absolutely fantastic. The space that is depicted on this screen is only there to get it on the screen. In truth, it is vastly greater than that. Atoms that have no solidity, and in the end, if you go deep enough, the nucleus and the electrons have no solidity, cannot a solid world make. But it doesn't have to, because the world isn't solid. Currently, I am walking around in my own head, my own perception, my own controlled hallucination. Here's a great quote. If the nucleus of an atom were the size of a peanut, the atom would be about the size of a baseball stadium. If we lost all the dead space inside our atoms, we would each be able to fit into a particle of dust, and the entire human race would fit into the volume of a sugar cube. There is no physical, only the decoded perception of it. What we call physical reality is holographic, that actually is not outside of us, that appears to be, we appear to experience it like that. It's inside of us. Human life is like watching an interactive virtual reality movie. The question is, are we going to watch it with a headset on and see it in the way that those that wish to dictate events want us to see it? Or are we going to open our awareness and see it in the panorama beyond that, and thus look back at this world and go, it's a piece of shit. Yes, exactly what it is. A hoax, an illusion. And what is happening when people play these sophisticated computer games? They are hacking into the same 5 sense decoding process through which we create our reality. Through the headset, through the gloves, through the headphones. The brain is being hijacked. Its information source, its normal information source, is being overridden, and thus it creates a reality which, as technology expands and expands, is getting closer and closer and closer to the reality that we're experiencing as the world. And these computer games can seem so amazingly real because the brain has been hijacked using the same basic processes that we create this reality from. And like I say, the more sophisticated they become, the more real they become. And people can be inserted into our reality through this virtual reality. Anything can. So maybe these people that describe their experiences with non-human entities may not be as crazy as the 5 senses would perceive them to be. The physics of of computer games is the same basic physics as our reality. The internet, computer games, all these things are technological mirrors, plagiarizations of reality as we are decoding it. And there's a reason for that. Just my opinion, I've had it for a very, very long time, that this level of 5 sense reality is actually a simulation. And this is not so much a world as an information source which we are decoding into an apparent world. And because it's a simulation, it's not natural, it's being created, I suggest, by a non-human force that I write about in my books. And this is why when people say, well, if we create our own reality, how can I see them lights? And everyone sees them lights, and everyone sees this, and everyone sees this car, everyone sees this house. Because we are decoding this basic construct we call the world in the same way that we decode computer games. And you're not going to see it if you're in this world and of it. All you're going to have is that information source to try to get a fix on what the information source is, i.e. the world we're experiencing. When you expand your perceptions, your consciousness beyond the program, beyond the frequency limitation of the program, then you start to get insights into this world. You might not go out there and look back and see it, but you hear somewhere, just know, perceive, have insight, understanding, intuitive knowing about the world that you live in, because you are not totally being controlled by information received by this simulation. The 5 sense level is, if that's all we operate on. So this is the real world that people talk about, which is not real at all. And so when people talk about the fact that they were beamed up on some beam of light into a ship, then people react. Again, it's all about information. It's like the Wi-Fi. Oh, load of rubbish. Oh, yeah, I understand that, yeah. If you believe the world is physical and solid, and the human body is physical and solid, then first of all, anything, for instance, like shape-shifting, impossible. Once you realize it's not solid, it's an information field, and you can have hybrid information fields which are different, what we would call genetic forms, then you can move between the two, and to the observer, as they decode that information field, in here, it appears that you have shifted from one shape to another. And people say, you can't do that, you can't go from a solid body to a solid body. No, you can't. But there is no solid. It's all information fields being decoded. And so, when people say, a physical body cannot be taken up into a ship on a beam of light, but there is no physical. Thus, anything becomes possible once you realize that. And keeping people in the dark means people are going to dismiss things that are happening because they cannot perceive how they could happen. This is mainstream science. We can't understand how it can happen, so it can't be happening. Anyone in the UFO extraterrestrial research arena will know that one. Instead of looking at something and say, well, look at the evidence, it is happening, so how is it happening? Which is what people with true intelligence do. And this is how ridiculous it is, this reality. How illusory it is. The observer decodes it. This is a mainstream media story. Your entire life, because more and more stories are coming out, even from some areas of mainstream science now that are saying this, your entire life is an illusion. New test backs up theory that the world doesn't exist until we look at it. There's another word I'll use instead of look at it in a second. Quantum mechanics states reality doesn't exist until it's measured. I would say this reality does not exist until it's decoded. And the process of focus, the process of what they call looking, activates that process of decoding. Just like the falling tree makes no noise, this reality, when it's not being decoded, is a waveform information construct. Your mind can control matter, says physicist. Atomic particles were shown to be also waves, which so many scientists were bamboozled by. How can something be a particle and a wave? Well, because it's a wave And then it is decoded by the act of observation, focus, and becomes a particle. But they're just two aspects of the same information. Whether they manifested as waves or as particles, this story says, depending on whether someone was looking, decoding. Observation influenced physical reality of the particles. In more technical language, observation collapsed the wave function. Decoding collapses the wave function into the holographic world that we think is outside of us. They call it the observer effect in science. I would call it the decoder effect. Now, this is a Nobel physicist, John Wheeler. No phenomenon is a real phenomenon until it is an observed phenomenon, a decoded phenomenon. Until then, it's a waveform information field. And the crazy thing, too, is that all this is going on in a narrow band of frequency, so tiny, it's laughable. The amount of infinite reality, i.e. infinite consciousness, that we can perceive is ridiculous to the point of insanity. According to mainstream science, the electromagnetic field, what we call light, is 0.005% of what exists in the universe. Some say it's a bit more, but not much. And all the rest, the scientists talk about dark energy and dark matter. I don't actually buy that explanation in the detail that they present it, but it's safe to say that all but a tiny fraction of reality, this universe included, is not seen by us. And even more hilarious is that within the 0.005%, all we can see of that is that sliver we call, or scientists call, visible light. That is the only world that we can perceive through the five senses. And if we stay in those five senses and perceive only that, we get our perceptions from that, brackets, deeply limited, our perception of self-identity from that, brackets, deeply limited, and we end up in a frequency box of perception while infinity lies beyond it. And so, because we can see such a narrow band of frequency, again, when people say, look, I saw this UFO, it just appeared out of nowhere, and then it disappeared out of nowhere into nowhere. Or somebody says, oh, this entity appeared in front of me, and out of nowhere, I didn't come here, this was just there. And then it disappeared. 5 cents, press enter, because that's what it is. Information, press enter, get the reaction, the program reaction. That's ridiculous. You can't just appear and disappear. Well, if you appear or enter the frequency band that people are decoding into what we call the visual world, then they will not be decoding you, They enter, now suddenly they're decoding you. To the observer, they've come out of bloody nowhere. They haven't at all. They've entered the frequency band that we can see. Same when they leave. Same thing. Again, these things are simply explainable, but only with any kind of basic understanding of reality. And that's why this system does not want us to understand this. They want us to think this is all physical, this is all real, it's all outside of us, because then we will waft our hands away constantly saying, not possible, that can't happen, that's ridiculous. Why are we enslaved by illusion? Because there's nothing wrong with illusions, decoded illusions. Illusions only control us when we think they're real and believe they're real. When we know they're illusions and we're decoding them, we can play with them, we can have fun with them. The reason that these illusions are enslaving us is because they're meant to. I can't go into this now because I want to stay on this subject today. But there is a web of human control that ultimately goes into the realms beyond this realm of human sight, into the unseen realms and has a non-human origin, a non-human spider at the center of the web, if you like, and then comes into our reality in the form of bloodline families, secret societies, and so on, which are dictating events in the world of the seen. And the whole foundation of this control is control of perception for all the reasons that I'm talking about. Who creates our reality? We do, but we do in the sense that our brain decodes, interprets reality. But it interprets reality on the basis of information received. Thus, whoever controls the information received, if it's not filtered by an awakened conscious mind, dictates the perceptions on which the brain decodes and structures and constructs this controlled hallucination. And if you can hijack what information people receive, you hijack their perceptions, you hijack the way they decode reality, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And of course, until relatively recently, scientists thought, because what you get with scientists, what we know is, and what you mean, mate, is what you think you know is now, and you'll know something else later. What we know is, they said, once the brain is formed, then that's how it is. Now they realize that's not only nonsense, the opposite is the case. Because of something called brain placidity, where the brain changes, rewires itself on the basis of what? Information received. This is why all this smart technology in all its forms is changing the human brain, because it's a vastly different information source to what was there before. And therefore, if you through your life are continually receiving the same information, the same perception of reality, your brain will rewire and reroute itself to constantly create that self-fulfilling prophecy. Got your perceptions, got you. And this is why human life, when you look at it from outside of the illusion, is one big program to impose a perception which imposes an experienced reality. Because what it is a narrow band of possibility. And what do you need to interact in an expanded way with the fields of possibility and potentialities? You need an expanded sense of the possible. What this postage stamp consensus is a squeezing of the possible. And from cradle to grave, that's basically all the information that people ever hear or see. And thus it becomes their normal. Everybody knows that, mate. And the postage stamp consensus can be also described as unquestioned belief. We receive this information from cradle to grave, from parents, and from the education system and the media and all this, and peer pressure. And if we don't question it, that unquestioned belief, perception coagulates, solidifies into a lifelong perception of possibility. And another part of this postage stamp consensus hoax is familiarity, which also is an expression of unquestioned belief. When something becomes familiar, it is no longer questioned. It becomes a gimme. It becomes an everyone knows that. It becomes this is the real world, mate.